Any serious attempt to understand reality must eventually confront the problem of pattern. Human beings do not merely encounter isolated events, they encounter repetitions, recurrences, regularities, and structures that reveal themselves over time. The same behavioral tendencies produce similar consequences. The same forms of disorder emerge when underlying conditions are neglected. The same principles appear across different scales of existence, from the individual to the family, from the institution to the civilization. For this reason, patterns are not superficial features of reality. They are among the clearest signs that reality is structured rather than arbitrary. Within the framework of absolute order, patterns may be understood as the visible language of an underlying intelligent structure. If reality is not fundamentally chaotic, then it must communicate its laws through recurrence. Order, by definition, implies relationship, stability, continuity, and intelligibility. Yet such order is not always directly perceived as an abstract whole. Human beings do not stand outside reality and observe it from a detached position. They live within it, act within it, suffer within it, and interpret it from inside. Consequently, order becomes visible primarily through repeated form. A pattern is the trace left behind when order expresses itself across time. This essay argues that patterns are the primary means by which absolute order becomes legible to human consciousness. Repetition is not accidental redundancy, it is structural evidence. Predictability is not equivalent to mechanical determinism or naive fortune telling. It is the recognition that reality exhibits dependable relations between causes, behaviors, and outcomes. Recognition, therefore, becomes a moral and intellectual responsibility. To ignore pattern is to remain blind to reality's structure. To recognize pattern is to move from confusion toward truth, from reaction toward understanding, and from fragmentation toward alignment. The essay proceeds in 5 stages. First, it examines the metaphysical meaning of pattern within an ordered reality. Second, it explores repetition as evidence of law. Third, it considers predictability as a form of structural literacy rather than absolute certainty. Fourth, it analyzes recognition as the decisive human response to pattern. Finally, it considers the ethical and civilizational consequences of living either in accord with or in denial of recurrent structure. The central claim throughout is simple but far reaching. What repeats in reality does so because reality is ordered, and what is ordered can be read. Pattern as the manifestation of structure. A pattern may be defined as repeated structure, discernible across multiple instances. This definition matters because it distinguishes pattern from coincidence. Coincidence refers to an isolated convergence without presumed deeper necessity. Pattern, by contrast, refers to recurrence sufficiently stable to suggest an underlying principle. It is not the repetition of identical surface details that matters most. but the recurrence of intelligible form. In other words, patterns are not merely repetitions of events, they are repetitions of relationships. This distinction is crucial. Human beings often fail to recognize patterns because they expect recurrence to appear in the same form each time. Yet reality rarely repeats itself with such superficial sameness. The structure persists while the presentation varies. A person may experience repeated failure in relationships, work, or health without ever facing the same external circumstances twice. However, if the underlying dynamic remains constant, avoidance of truth, poor discipline, weak boundaries, fantasy over realism, or appetite over restraint, then the pattern remains intact. What changes is the surface expression, not the governing principle. Within the logic of absolute order, this recurrence is deeply significant. If reality is fundamentally lawful, then its laws must become visible somewhere in experience. Human beings cannot directly observe order itself in a pure form detached from the lived world. What they can observe are its manifestations, repeated consequences, recurring structures, and persistent regularities. Patterns thus function as the interface between metaphysical order and empirical life. They are the means through which the hidden grammar of reality becomes perceptible. Continue reading the essay along with its accompanying mini workbook on Amazon.